Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, the Trump administration has placed all staff on administrative leave at the federal department dedicated to museums and libraries. We'll look at what potential cuts could mean for these institutions.
And Detroit is a city ruled by cars. But research suggests pedestrian-only areas are good for people and the community. We'll look at one pedestrian-only plan taking shape in Greektown.
Plus, we'll learn about the rise of a once-eradicated illness, measles, and what federal cuts to the Health and Human Services Department could mean for communities here in Metro Detroit.
But first, a number of free speech activists and advocates are concerned right now. That's because the Trump administration has revoked visas for roughly 300 international students. They could face deportation for committing traffic violations or for their participation in political activism. The New York Times reports that this kind of federal action is rare in both cases. Sure, students are always at risk of losing their status for criminal convictions, but almost never for political demonstrations. People working in the Trump administration, like Secretary of State Marco Rubio, say student activists don't have a right to be here.
If you apply for a visa to enter the United States and be a student, and you tell us that the reason why you're coming to the United States is not just because you want to write op-eds, but because you want to participate in movements that are involved in doing things like vandalizing universities, harassing students, taking over buildings, creating a ruckus, we're not going to give you a visa. If you lie to us and get a visa and then enter the United States and with that visa participate in that sort of activity, we're going to take away your visa. And once you've lost your visa, you're no longer legally in the United States, and we have a right, like every country in the world has a right, to remove you from our country. I think it's stupid for any country in the world to welcome people into their country that are going to go to your universities as visitors. They're visitors. And say, I'm going to your universities to start a riot.
To be sure, it's unclear whether any students who've lost their visas have been charged with starting a riot. And so this has a lot of people worried about crackdowns on free speech and the broader implications for all Americans. That includes Amir Makled. He's a civil rights attorney representing a University of Michigan protester pro bono. That protester faces criminal charges. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel is pursuing those charges for allegedly defying law enforcement. On Sunday, Amir was detained for 2 hours by federal agents at Detroit Metro Airport. Makled was on our show just last month to explain why he's representing a pro-Palestine protester. Now he's back to talk about being detained by federal officials. Amir, welcome back to the Metro.
Thank you so much, Robin, for having me.
And we should note we contacted the regional U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. It participated in the detainment of Amir. We have not yet received a comment from them. So, Amir, what was your first reaction to being detained?
Well, initially, I didn't anticipate being detained at all. I walked up to the passport desk, and then the agent looked over to another buddy agent of his, a coworker, and asked if there was a special team available. The acronym they used was TTRT. I didn't know what the acronym meant, so I looked it up. And lo and behold, it turns out to be the Tactical Terrorism Response Team. And so at that point, my heart fell into my stomach. I said, "Oh boy, here it comes." They ushered me into an interview room. They said, "Sir, follow us." They took me into an interview. My wife and kids were with me at the time. They were panicked and a little dismayed. We all, as a family, sat in this little room for about maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And the first thing I asked them was, is my family free to leave? Do you need them to stay here? Which they allowed them to leave, which, at that point I felt a lot more comfortable. I'm trained to deal with law enforcement. I've been a civil rights attorney for nearly 15 years. I don't have much fear when it comes to speaking or engaging with law enforcement. But in this situation, never have I been the target, and it's unnerving for anybody, especially somebody like myself. I've been trained to do this, but it's still very unnerving to have to go through that experience.
Amir, you're the son of immigrants.
Right.
As an Arab American, you explained to me last time we spoke you've experienced discrimination in the past. Were you thinking about that while being detained, about the duality of being both American and of Arab descent?
Oh, absolutely. Of course. I mean, it's you're always concerned when traveling through the border, as an Arab American or Muslim American. It doesn't ever, that fear never leaves us as we're traveling through the border and going through any type of a customs or immigration type status. And I'm born in Detroit. I mean, where are they going to deport me? Back to Detroit? That's where I was heading. But it doesn't matter. You still feel it. You still feel the unnerving. But when you're actually selected, right, and it's not random because they were waiting for me. In this case, it's quite interesting. The moment I got a plainclothes officer comes in, he says, "We know that you're an attorney, and we know that you're taking some high-profile cases." That's the very first thing they started with. And at that point, I said, "Okay, let's see where this goes and what's it about." I was really concerned. They asked if I had my phone on me. I said, "Yeah, I have my phone. Of course, it's right here." Well, he gives me a pamphlet, and the pamphlet had, federal statutes listed on it. I was familiar with those statutes. What's crazy about this statute, though, is even as American citizens, it doesn't matter. At the border, they can confiscate your phone. It's the most insane statute I've ever seen because we assume that we have Fourth Amendment rights for a search and seizure, and they can't just take your property and collect all your data. But the government does have the right to take your phone, even as an American citizen, at the border, only at the border, without a search warrant.
So do you believe then that they detained you? It was because they want to deport people associated with the protests against Israel's war on Hamas in Gaza? Or do you have an understanding, a grasp on why they detained you exactly?
There's really no way for me to know 100% why. It did stick out to me immediately that they started with, "We know that you're an attorney and we know that you're taking on some high-profile cases." And the only high-profile case I'm taking currently is the case of Samantha Lewis. She's a University of Michigan protester. She was protesting against the war in Gaza. She was part of the encampment on the Diag in Ann Arbor's campus. And that's the only any case of notoriety that I have. But these agents were interested in those topics, in my cases, in my history as an attorney. And then when he asked for my phone, I said, "Listen, you already know that I'm a lawyer. You've said it. You've done your research." Because he told me, I looked you up. I said, "All my data is privileged. I have emails going back, over a decade. I have text messages. I have all my files. Everything's in a cloud. Nobody takes paper files anymore, anywhere, really. But I'm not just going to hand over all of my content, to the government. There's no chance. I have an obligation to the people that I represent. There's no way I'm going to do that." He said, "Well, okay, we'll figure something out. We want your phone. Either we'll take it or you can show it to us. Unlock your phone, show us the phone, and we'll look at it and we'll give it back to you." I said, No. There's got to be a different way. He goes, "Well, let me talk to a supervisor." So they iced me for another 20 minutes or so in this room. At that point, they come back. They said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We'll give you a notepad. We'll give you a pen. Write down everything that you believe is in your phone that could be privileged, and then we won't look at that." I said, what kind of exercise is this? This is a futile exercise. It'd take me days probably to go through all that stuff. It's an impossibility. No way. It's impossible. You get 10 years of data or more. He said, "Okay, well, we'll think of something else." He comes back. He says, "Fine. If you don't want us to take your phone today, let us see your contact list. We'll look at the contact list only, and then we'll give your phone back." I said, "Okay." I wanted to leave with my phone today. I use my phone every day. I said, "Oh, you can see my contact list, but you can't ask me anything more than that." They said, "Fine." He gave me a piece of paper. He said, "Give me authority to look at your contact list." So I wrote that down. I said, "You have authority only to look at my contact list." And they accepted that note that I wrote. I signed it. I gave it to them. They come back. They got about 5 names or 6 names, of people that are in my contact list. They want to know about them, right? And I don't know if they ran a search and, something triggered these names, or if these were determined names that they were, wanted to investigate or ask me about. But nonetheless, it was fairly quick. It couldn't have been more than 10 minutes, from the time they looked at my contact list to when they came back. And they went through these names. And so at that point I said, "Listen, now you're getting into, a much deeper territory of questioning. And, and my lawyer hat is still on at this point. I said, everybody in my phone is a friend, acquaintance, or client. That's all I can say to you. There's no other reason to be in my phone. So whatever you think that I'm going to tell you about whoever's names you're giving me, I'm not going to answer that, and I don't have to answer it. So it's either a friend, acquaintance, or client. That's all you're getting out of me. This whole ordeal took about nearly 2 hours. I landed from Punta Cana. Mind you, I'm coming back from spring break. I took my daughters on a trip. It was just 5 or 6 days in Punta Cana. I landed about 7. I didn't get out of there until about nearly 9 o'clock. I was the last person in the immigration area. When you're coming off the plane, you got to pick up your luggage and whatnot. The gates were closed. It was empty. They had to walk me out.
Not exactly the way you want to return to your country as an American citizen. You didn't want to give your contacts to immigration officials. Why did you?
I knew that they were going to take my phone. I didn't want them to take the device and then dump it, because they have the ability to do that. They would have taken it for days or weeks. And I wanted to protect the other data that was in my phone, which was, the data that had actual content of people's communications with me. A contact list, I don't think is to me at that moment. I made a determination that would be the least, a very narrowly tailored and the least restrictive type intrusion on me. Without them having to just take my phone, because that's really what their goal was. They wanted to just hold the device, dump it, and bring it back to me. And that's how they started the conversation with me. They gave me this pamphlet with the statute on it. They said, listen, either we're going to take it or you're going to show it to us.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Amir Makled, a civil rights attorney who was detained for 2 hours by federal agents on Sunday at Detroit Metro Airport. He says those agents wanted to review his contacts in his cell phone. Amir, in a statement to the Detroit Free Press, a Customs, Border, and Protection spokesperson denied claims that CPB is searching more electronic media due to the administration change. His statement reads that, quote, CPB's search numbers are consistent with increases since 2021, and less than 0.1% of travelers have their devices searched. How would you respond to that?
I'm curious to see what the criteria is for people's devices to be searched without a warrant. I'd like to know why the government feels that they should trample on the rights of citizens at the border, and even non-citizens. Where do they come off believing that they have the right without a warrant, without probable cause, without any thought or hunch even that criminal activity is afoot? There's zero standard as to why they would take somebody's device, why they feel that they have the right to do that, and why the statute is even on the books. They asked for my cell phone, and that's my personal data first and foremost. There's a lot of my own stuff on there, but more important than my personal stuff is the clients that I have, all the communications that are on my device. It's all protected by attorney-client privilege, and if the government is doing this systemically and they're claiming, it's a very small number, what is the criteria that they're using to search people's devices? Because they're always going to say national security or things of that nature, but none of the people that they asked me about have ever been charged with national security crimes. So, I know that's something for sure. I'm certainly not somebody who has been charged with any concern for national security. I'm an attorney. I'm familiar with the law. I'm confident that I haven't committed any crimes. So what's the purpose of them wanting to search my phone?
So you were detained because federal agents want the details of people you represent. With regards to international students that are having their visas removed, I think someone sympathetic to the Trump administration would say that people get deported all the time for nefarious activities they do in the U.S., and that the administration is just doing its due diligence right now, making sure that people here on a visa aren't causing issues. What do you make of that perspective?
It's a intimidation tactic. I mean, the perspective of people can be deported as a visitor, no problem. Or somebody who's on a visa that hasn't been a naturalized citizen yet, if they commit crimes. But when they're deporting individuals for political speech, for activism, Now we're getting into, a much different territory, a much darker territory, and I think it's a trample on our civil liberties and our civil rights, and it's everything that our country stood for. Right? We're supposed to be the land of the free here. Where are our freedoms? Where are our civil liberties? Where is the amendments, the First Amendment, all the Bill of Rights that we have? Why did they not? Where are they? Do they even exist anymore?
I want to play a clip from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, what he recently said, and then I'll have you respond to that.
If you apply for a visa to enter the United States and be a student, and you tell us that the reason why you're coming to the United States is not just because you want to write op-eds, but because you want to participate in movements that are involved in doing things like vandalizing universities, harassing students, taking over buildings, creating a ruckus, we're not going to give you a visa. If you lie to us and get a visa and then enter the United States and with that visa participate in that sort of activity, we're going to take away your visa. And once you've lost your visa, you're no longer legally in the United States, and we have a right, like every country in the world has a right, to remove you from our country. I think it's stupid for any country in the world to welcome people into their country that are going to go to your universities as visitors. They're visitors. And say, I'm going to your universities to start a riot.
Amir, the protesters that the U.S. has thrown out of the country or forced out at this point haven't been found guilty of vandalizing anything. But still, I wonder, what do you make of Rubio's comments that the U.S. should be able to remove anyone causing a disturbance here?
It's a intimidation tactic. It's a tactic, to dissuade others from engaging in political activism. They know that they have the right to revoke these visas for non-citizens. They're showing you, it's quite clear. I mean, they're not even hiding it at this point, that we're going to kick you out. If you engage in this type of activism, we're kicking you out. And he gave us the examples of vandalism and other participating in riots are terms that he used. But there's no example of any of these students that we're seeing that have been deported or being held by immigration having engaged in any vandalism or riots and things of that nature. This is political activism. This is an op-ed, a written article. That's not a riot by any means. There's no vandalism, from any of these students. Nobody's been charged. Vandalism is a crime. You're entitled to your day in court if you're charged with a crime. We still have those rights, I would imagine, right? These students have never been charged with these crimes. So when they tell us, look, if you're going to lie to us and apply it to visitor visas or student visas, and then when you get here, you're going to engage in this type of activity, it sounds good. They're good talking points, but it's not what's happening. Nobody's been charged or convicted of these types of issues. They're doing it based only on political speech, and they're criminalizing political speech. That's what's happening with the protester case I'm dealing with in Ann Arbor.
I want to zoom in on your case, actually. So, again, you're representing a protester at the University of Michigan who's being charged by Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel's office for, quote, defying orders from law enforcement to vacate the protesting camp and for physically obstructing the police and pushing against their bodies. Now, Amir, after we had our last conversation, the Attorney General's office got back to us and said that, quote, defendants in this case have been accused of specific illegal acts detailed throughout the open court proceedings alongside supporting evidence described in public charging documents and well articulated by this office. What do you make of her claim?
I think it's a stretch. I think the Attorney General's office has taken on this case based off of a political prosecution. There's no reason for these students and activists to be charged. They were doing a peaceful encampment. When the officers came to the scene that morning, it was nearly 5:30 in the morning. They gave an order, right? They had about 30 or 40 uniformed riot gear officers lined up in unison, holding batons, standing side by side with each other, and gave an announcement that said, you have 10 minutes to leave. Pack your things and leave. Within 5 minutes, they didn't wait the 10 minutes. Within 5 minutes, these uniformed officers started walking into this encampment with their batons and busting everything up. Just hammering away at tents, at tables, at chairs, at anything that was standing in their way. And these students are standing in front of them. I mean, it was an archaic scene. Nobody was saying that the students, what were they doing that was causing the harm? What was the purpose of this order to vacate? They had the right to stand there. They can sleep there. The DIAC has historically been a place of political speech. It's historically been, and universities are historically, a hotbed for political discussion, and that's what universities are for. But in this situation, they couldn't stand that this encampment was still going on for nearly 30 days.
I know you say this is a double standard, that you spoke with police who couldn't remember breaking up another protest in recent history. Could you elaborate on what those police said?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I asked specific questions in the exam, at the preliminary exam in the district court in Ann Arbor. I asked every officer, have you ever shown up in riot gear and disrupted any political protest in the history of you being an officer on campus? All of them said no. This is the first time these officers, and many of these officers have been there for almost 10 years. It doesn't occur. We've had, and then they spoke about, okay, now the encampment consisted of probably about 30 or so students that morning, and throughout the entire 30-day period, it was no more than like 30 or 40 students at any given time. And they would say, well, we have concerns about open flames or a generator or some type of safety concerns. When I look at Ann Arbor's campus, if you look at a Saturday afternoon football game, you have 100,000 people or more coming onto campus, many of them drinking alcohol, many of them having open flames and tailgating and barbecuing, and the campus safety is not so concerned. In fact, they encourage it. And so in this situation, why are you now saying, okay, well, we're concerned about maybe the congregation of these students and how they're sitting with each other, but they on Saturday afternoon, let's have a party. There's no concern whatsoever. So all of these, they're excuses. They're excuses to trying to break up the encampment. They're trying to find a way, whether it was a fire marshal safety concern, whether it is a concern for vandalism. None of the students in this case have been charged with vandalism. There was some comments I've seen in the media where they thought these students were disrupting class. This isn't May, towards the end of May when this encampment was going on. The university was done. Class was out. They were on break.
Amir Makled is a civil rights attorney representing a pro-Palestine protester who demonstrated at the University of Michigan. He himself was detained by federal agents on Sunday at Detroit Metro Airport. Amir, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Robin, thank you so much for having me.
Up next, all of the staff for the Institute for Library and Museum Services have been put on administrative leave as part of the Trump administration's efforts to cut federal spending. Proposed cuts of $266 million will affect museums and libraries across the country, including here in Metro Detroit. We'll learn more. This is the Metro. Stay with us.